I am 52 years old, a woman who has, until recently, considered her life to be a quiet success. I raised a good son, managed the finances my late husband left us with a steady hand, and maintained a home filled with warmth and what I thought was mutual respect. The line they crossed was not a small one. It was not a misunderstanding or a careless comment. At my own son's engagement party, in the home my husband and I built together, they put me in a corner. Not just figuratively, but literally. At a small, wobbly card table next to the catering entrance, while the main festivities bloomed around a series of elegantly dressed round tables. That was the final insult, the one that made me realize that my silence was no longer a virtue. It was a weakness they were happily exploiting. So I stood on a chair, in the middle of all their manufactured glamour, and I told everyone the one secret that would bring their whole dishonest charade crashing down around them. I announced my son's vasectomy. My son, Leo, is 28. He is a good man, or at least he was raised to be one. Kind, thoughtful, and perhaps a little too eager to please, a trait his fiancée, Chloe, and her mother, Margaret, had honed into a weapon to be used against anyone who stood in the way of their ambitions. They were a formidable pair, polished and smiling on the outside, but with the cold, hard glint of opportunism in their eyes. I saw it the first time I met them, but I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I was the grieving widow, the overprotective mother, and that I needed to give them a chance. I gave them chance after chance, and each one was taken, twisted, and used to push me further and further into the margins of my own family's life. The pressure points were always the same: money and status. My late husband, Robert, had been a successful architect. He left behind a comfortable legacy, not extravagant wealth, but enough to ensure that Leo and I would never have to worry. We lived well but modestly. We valued education, travel, and charity over flashy cars and designer clothes. Margaret, on the other hand, came from a world where the appearance of wealth was everything. She saw our comfortable life not as a blessing to be cherished, but as a resource to be plundered. She spoke of our family's legacy as if she had been a part of building it, her eyes scanning my living room, mentally appraising the art on the walls. She would make comments, always with a tinkling little laugh, about how the house needed updating, or how Leo needed a car that reflected his position, in her mind, was as the future head of a dynasty she was determined to create. Chloe was her mother's perfect disciple. She was beautiful, charming, and utterly vacant of any original thought. She mirrored Margaret's desires, her ambitions, her cutting little remarks. When she looked at Leo, I never saw love. I saw a project, a handsome, well-off, pliable man who could be molded into the perfect accessory for the life she felt she deserved. She would hang on his arm, her eyes wide with adoration, but the moment he turned away, her gaze would sweep the room, calculating, assessing. She was a performer, and Leo was her adoring, unsuspecting audience of one. My relationship with Leo had always been the bedrock of my life, especially after Robert passed away. We were a team. We talked about everything, or so I thought. When he told me about the vasectomy 3 years ago, it was during a long, difficult conversation. Robert's father, Leo's grandfather, had suffered from a terrible, degenerative genetic condition. It had stolen his mind and his body slowly, painfully. Robert had been tested and was not a carrier, a miracle we celebrated privately. But the fear had always lingered in a dark corner of our minds. After Robert's sudden death from a heart attack, that fear took root in Leo. He confessed to me one night, his voice thick with emotion, that he could not bear the thought of potentially passing on that suffering. He had decided he would not have biological children. It was a decision born of love, of compassion, of a profound sense of responsibility. I held him, I told him I understood, and I promised I would always support his choice and protect his privacy. That promise was a sacred trust between us. Now, that trust was being used as a foundation for a lie. From the moment the engagement was announced, Margaret and Chloe began a relentless campaign centered on the future. Specifically, future children. Oh, The beautiful babies they will have, Margaret would exclaim at every opportunity, clutching her chest theatrically. With your family's good looks and our family's, well, our family's good looks too, she would say with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Chloe would blush and giggle, playing the part of the demure, fertile bride-to-be. They talked about nurseries, about schools, about legacy trusts. They spoke of grandchildren as if they were already on order, a set of custom-designed accessories for their perfect life. I tried to talk to Leo. I started gently. Chloe and your mother seem very focused on children, I said one afternoon over coffee. Have you two had a serious conversation about your future, about your timeline? He shifted in his seat, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Of course, Mom, he said a little too quickly. We've talked about it. Chloe knows I want to wait a few years, get more established. Waiting a few years is different from never, Leo. I pressed, my heart sinking. Do they understand that? It's complicated, he mumbled, looking down at his cup. We're working through it. Chloe is very understanding. But she wasn't understanding. She was ignoring. And he was letting her. That conversation was the first crack in the foundation. I realized he hadn't told her. Or, if he had allowed her to believe it was a temporary whim, a youthful phase he would outgrow. He was so desperate for her love, so caught up in the whirlwind of her and Margaret's grand plans, that he was sacrificing the most fundamental truths about himself. He was letting them build a future on a lie, and he was letting them make me a silent accomplice. The pressure to keep his secret was now a gag, preventing me from speaking the truth that would protect him. I felt a cold dread creep into my heart. This was not a simple romance. This was a hostile takeover of my son's life, and I was being politely, but firmly, escorted out of the building. The engagement party was just the final eviction notice. My suspicions about Chloe and her mother had been simmering for months before the engagement was even announced. It started with small things, little instances of control that seemed insignificant on their own but, when strung together, painted a disturbing picture. I remember one of the first times Leo brought Chloe over for dinner. I had made his favorite meal, a recipe my own mother had taught me, a rich beef stew that took hours to prepare. He loved it, and it was a small way for me to feel connected to him, to care for him. When they arrived, Chloe wrinkled her nose as she walked in. "What is that smell?" she asked, not with curiosity, but with a faint air of disgust. "It's beef stew," I said, my smile faltering slightly. "It's Leo's favorite." "Oh," she said, her voice flat. She turned to Leo and pouted playfully. "Darling, you didn't tell me your mother was cooking such a rustic meal." "I'm trying to watch my figure," she patted her perfectly flat stomach. Leo, ever the peacemaker, jumped in. "It's delicious, Chloe, you'll love it," he said. "And, Mom, Chloe is mostly vegetarian now." I looked at him, surprised. This was news to me. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Chloe. I had no idea. I can easily whip up a salad or an omelet for you," I offered. No, it's fine," Margaret, who had arrived with them, chimed in, waving a dismissive hand. "Chloe will just pick at it. We can't expect everyone to keep up with modern dietary habits." The implication was clear. I was old-fashioned, out of touch. Throughout the meal, Chloe and Margaret dominated the conversation. They talked about their friends, their shopping trips, their plans for a holiday in Europe. They asked me no questions about my life or my interests. When I tried to join the conversation, my comments were met with polite but brief smiles before they moved on. I felt like a spectator in my own home. After they left, I started to clear the plates. Chloe's bowl of stew was virtually untouched. Leo came into the kitchen, a strained look on his face. "Sorry about that, Mom," he said quietly. "It's fine, honey," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "I just wish you had told me about her being a vegetarian." "It's a new thing," he said, shrugging. I can't keep track, but his eyes told a different story. He looked stressed. He looked like he was walking on eggshells. That was the first time I felt a real pang of fear for him. As their relationship progressed, so did the instances of subtle erasure. They started planning weekends away, without a thought to family traditions. The annual trip Leo and I took to the mountains to mark the anniversary of his father's passing was brushed aside. "Oh, we've already booked a spa weekend for that date," Chloe announced breezily. "You don't mind, do you?" Leo needs to relax, not mope. I tried to talk to my best friend, Sarah, about it. Sarah had known me since college and had been a rock after Robert died. I laid out my concerns over a long lunch, feeling a bit foolish and petty as I listed the small slights. She called my cooking rustic? She thinks our family traditions are moping? I finished, feeling a lump in my throat. Am I just being a jealous mother? Am I that cliché? Sarah took a long sip of her iced tea, her expression serious. "No, you're not," she said firmly. "You are one of the most generous, open-minded people I know. If you're feeling this way, it's because they are making you feel this way. This isn't about you being jealous. This is about them being bulldozers. They are systematically removing everything from Leo's life that isn't about them." Her words were a comfort, but also a confirmation of my deepest fears. "What do I do, Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "If I push back, I'll be the evil mother-in-law. I'll drive Leo away." "You have to talk to him," she insisted. "Not about them, but about him. Ask him if he's happy. Ask him if he feels like himself. Don't make it about you versus them. Make it about his well-being." I took her advice. I tried to have that conversation with Leo several times, but it was like trying to talk to a stranger. He was defensive, evasive. "I've never been happier, Mom," he would insist, but his eyes were shadowed, and he had lost weight. He was constantly checking his phone, responding to a stream of texts from Chloe. He was a man under siege, but he called it love. The engagement announcement was a spectacle. It wasn't a private, happy moment. It was a carefully orchestrated social media event, complete with a professional photographer hiding in the bushes to capture Chloe's surprised reaction. The ring was enormous, far more extravagant than anything Leo would have chosen on his own. I knew instantly that Margaret and Chloe had guided his choice, probably right down to the specific jeweler. The day after the announcement, Margaret called me. "We need to start planning the engagement party," she said. "No preamble, no congratulations. I've already secured the country club, but Chloe thinks it would be more intimate to have it at your house. It has such lovely bones, even if it is a bit dated." I was stunned into silence for a moment. "My house." I finally managed. "Yes," she said impatiently. "It sends the right message. The joining of two families. We'll bring in our own caterers and decorators, of course. You won't have to lift a finger. Just provide the venue." I felt a surge of anger. "Margaret, that is my home. You don't just secure it like it's a rental hall." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she trilled. "This is for Leo and Chloe. We all have to make little sacrifices, don't we? I'll have my assistant send over the preliminary schedule," and she hung up. That phone call was a declaration of war. They weren't just taking over my son. They were taking over my home, my life, my identity as the matriarch of my family. They were demoting me to the role of venue provider. And through it all, the topic of children kept coming up, a constant, cheerful drumbeat in the background of their planning. It was during a planning meeting at my house, a meeting I had been invited to, that I first heard the inconsistency that would become my weapon. Margaret was pacing my living room, gesturing expansively. "And this corner here," she said, pointing to the spot where Robert's favorite reading chair sat, "will be perfect for the gift table. We'll need to move this old chair out, of course. Then, after the wedding, when the first baby comes, this room will make a wonderful playroom. We can knock out that wall." Chloe clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Mother, you think of everything. A playroom? Leo, isn't that a wonderful idea?" Leo, who had been silent for most of the meeting, just nodded, a weak smile on his face. My gaze met his across the room, and I raised an eyebrow. I tried to send him a silent message. "Are you hearing this? Are you going to say something?" He looked away, his jaw tight. Later that evening, after they had finally swept out of my house in a cloud of expensive perfume and grand plans, I cornered Leo in the kitchen. "A playroom?" I asked, my voice low, and steady. Knocking out walls for future babies? Leo, this has gone too far. You have to tell them the truth. Mom, please not now, he begged, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't the right time. When is the right time, Leo? I demanded, my voice rising. After the wedding? After she's legally your wife and finds out you can't give her the one thing she and her mother are clearly planning your entire future around? Do you think that will go over well? I'll tell her, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I just need to find the perfect moment. I don't want to lose her. And what about you? I asked, my heart breaking for him. Are you willing to lose yourself? To live a lie just to keep her? That isn't love, Leo. That's a hostage situation. He flinched as if I had slapped him. You don't understand, he said, his voice cold. You've never liked her. You've been against this from the start. That's not true, I said, my own anger rising. I am against watching my son be manipulated. I am against watching him be erased by two women who see him as nothing more than a stepping stone to the life they want. I have to go, he said abruptly, turning for the door. I'll see you at the party. He walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet of my kitchen. The silence was heavy with unspoken words, with the chasm that was rapidly opening between us. I knew then that he wasn't going to tell her. He was too afraid, too deep in their web. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I didn't do something, they would destroy him. The engagement party was no longer just a party. It was a battlefield, and I had to choose my weapon. In the weeks leading up to the party, I tried to find a different way. I truly did. I thought that if I could just get through to Leo, if I could make him see the corner he was painting himself into, then the whole awful mess could be avoided. I called him a few days after our fight. He was hesitant to pick up, but finally did. Hi, Mom, he said, his voice wary. Hi, sweetheart, I said, trying to sound calm and loving, trying to bridge the gap between us. I'm sorry about the other night. I was just worried. I know, he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. It's just a lot right now. Planning this party, the wedding. Margaret and Chloe have a lot of ideas. I'm sure they do, I said carefully. Leo, I just want to ask you one more time. Does Chloe know? Does she really, truly understand your decision about children? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. We're going to talk about it, he finally said, the same weak excuse he had used before. After the party. I don't want to add any more stress right now. Leo, keeping a secret like this is the stress, I pleaded. It will only get harder. The longer you wait, the bigger the betrayal will feel to her. A part of me was still trying to give Chloe the benefit of the doubt, assuming she was merely uninformed, not malicious. I know what I'm doing, Mom, he said, and this time his voice was sharp. It was Margaret's tone. It was the tone of someone dismissing a nuisance. Just please. Can you just be supportive? For one night? Just come to the party and smile and be happy for us. That's all I'm asking. He was asking me to be an actress, to stand by and applaud while he tied himself to a future built on a lie. My heart ached. That was the conversation that made me realize I couldn't save him by talking to him. He was too far gone, too invested in the fantasy Chloe and Margaret were selling. I had to find another way to show him the truth. I had to find irrefutable proof of their manipulation. My investigation, if you can call it that, began with listening. I became a ghost in my own house during their frequent planning sessions. They would sweep in, talking loudly, moving furniture, treating the space as their own personal event headquarters. I would make myself scarce, retreating to my study, with the door slightly ajar. I wasn't proud of it, but I was desperate. During one of these sessions, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Margaret and Chloe were in the dining room, discussing the guest list. Did you remember to invite the Hendersons? Margaret asked. Charles Henderson is on the board of the yacht club. It would be very good for Leo's career if they were to get to know him. Of course, Mother, Chloe said. And I put them at our table. Leo can sit next to Charles. Good girl, Margaret purred. And what about Leo's mother? Where have you put her? There was a pause. Then Chloe giggled. It was not a nice sound. I found the perfect spot for her, she said. You know that little table we were going to use for the guest book? I thought we could put it by the kitchen door. It's out of the way. She can have a nice, quiet evening and not be overwhelmed by all the people. Perfect, Margaret said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. It's a kindness, really. She's not exactly a social butterfly, is she? This way, she can feel included without actually being in the way. I had to put my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. In the way. They saw me as an obstacle. A piece of old furniture, like my husband's reading chair, that needed to be moved to a dark corner to make room for their grand designs. The cruelty of it, the casual, smiling dismissal, was breathtaking. It wasn't just about them wanting control. It was about them enjoying the process of taking it from me. They weren't just erasing me. They were savoring it. That was the moment my resolve hardened from worried concern into cold, hard steel. I started looking for more concrete evidence. I knew Margaret was obsessed with money, so I started there. I had access to a joint account that Robert had set up for Leo, a trust fund that he would gain full control of when he turned 30. I was the trustee, so I could see the statements. I hadn't looked at it in years, trusting Leo to be responsible. But now, a knot of suspicion urged me to check. What I found was not a case of theft, but of 1,000 tiny cuts. There were charges from designer boutiques I knew Leo would never step foot in. Charges for lavish dinners at restaurants he couldn't stand. Charges for spa days, for salon appointments, for a lifestyle that was Chloe's, not his. He was bleeding money to keep her happy, to keep up with the image she and Margaret were so carefully crafting. He was funding his own downfall. But the most damning discovery was a series of emails. Leo had accidentally stayed logged into his email on my home computer. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, but my conscience was screaming at me that he was in danger. I told myself I was looking for a reason to stop, a reason to believe I was wrong about them. I found the opposite. I found an email chain between Chloe and her mother from a few months back. The subject line was the Leo Project. I felt sick as I clicked on it. It was a long, detailed discussion about his finances, his career prospects, and his malleable personality. But the part that made me stop breathing was a section about his strange hang-up about kids. Chloe had written, "He's still going on about that ridiculous vasectomy idea. He says it's because of his family history, but I think it's just a phase. He's scared of the responsibility." Margaret's reply was chillingly practical. "Don't push him on it directly, darling. It will only make him dig his heels in. Men like Leo need to be handled with care. We just need to get the wedding done. Once you are Mrs. Leo's last name, you will have all the leverage. We can talk to Dr. Evans about a reversal. It's a simple procedure. And if he's still being difficult, well, a little public embarrassment can be a powerful motivator. No man wants to be seen as less of a man. We will get our grandchildren, Chloe. Just be patient and play your part." I had to close the laptop. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was all there in black and white. The deception, the manipulation, the cold, calculated plan to trap my son, to medically coerce him, to publicly humiliate him if he didn't comply. They weren't just ignoring his decision. They were plotting to dismantle it, to strip him of his bodily autonomy, of the deeply personal choice he had made out of love and fear. They were going to break his spirit and his promise to himself, all for the sake of their own selfish desires. This was so much darker than I had ever imagined. This wasn't about a clash of personalities or a simple case of a son pulling away from his mother. This was a premeditated campaign of emotional and financial abuse. And they were planning to use my home as the stage for the next act of their play. My grief and worry transformed into a white-hot rage. They had made a terrible mistake. They thought I was a quiet, gentle widow they could push into a corner. They had no idea that I was also a mother. And there is nothing more dangerous than a mother protecting her child. My plan, which had been a vague, desperate idea, now had a purpose. It wasn't about revenge for my own hurt feelings anymore. It was about liberation. I was going to burn their whole project to the ground. The days leading up to the party were a blur of forced politeness. Margaret and Chloe were in and out of the house constantly, directing florists, caterers, and lighting technicians with the precision of military generals. They treated me with a kind of patronizing sweetness, the way one might treat a slightly confused elderly relative. "Isn't this exciting, dear?" Margaret would say, patting my arm before turning to a workman to bark an order. "Don't you worry about a thing. We have it all under control." They were so confident in their power, so certain of my irrelevance, that they didn't even bother to hide their machinations. They openly discussed their plans in front of me, assuming I was either too stupid to understand or too weak to object. I overheard Chloe on the phone, laughing with one of her friends. "Yes, the party is at his mother's house," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's a bit dated, but it has good bones. We're thinking of it as a trial run for the renovation we'll do after we're married. First thing to go will be all this dark wood and those dreadful old paintings." She was talking about my husband's favorite chair, the art he had collected, the home he had designed and built. She spoke of destroying our history as if she were discussing changing the curtains. Each word was a fresh shovel of dirt on the grave of the respect I had once tried to show her. I just smiled my quiet, gentle smile and continued to watch them. I let them believe they were winning. I let them underestimate me. It was the only weapon I had left. I saw very little of Leo during this time. He was swept up in their whirlwind, constantly running errands for them, attending fittings, being the handsome, silent prop in their pre-wedding fantasy. When I did see him, he looked like a ghost. The shadows under his eyes were deeper. His smile was a tight, joyless line. He was performing his role, just as they had instructed. The night before the party, he came over late. The house was in a state of chaotic transformation. White tents were being erected on the lawn, strings of fairy lights were draped over the trees, and the living room was filled with floral arrangements that smelled cloyingly sweet, like a funeral. He found me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, the only room that hadn't been completely taken over yet. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. He looked utterly exhausted. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "You look like you need a cup of tea." He sank into the chair opposite me and nodded. I got up and made him one, my movements slow and deliberate. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. "It's a lot, isn't it?" he finally said, staring into his cup. "It's a production," I agreed. "Margaret and Chloe certainly know how to put on a show." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Mom, about tomorrow, can you just try? For me? I know you and Chloe have gotten off on the wrong foot, but she's really trying. She's just nervous." I almost laughed. Chloe wasn't nervous. She was triumphant. "Leo," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I will be polite. I will be gracious. I will not make a scene." At that point, my plan did not involve a public scene. It involved a private one, a quiet word with a few key people, a subtle deployment of the truth. But his words, his complete blindness to the reality of his situation, started to change my mind. "Thank you," he said, his shoulders slumping in relief. "That's all I ask. It's so important to Chloe that everyone gets along. Her family is everything to her." "And what about your family, Leo?" I asked quietly. "Are we everything to you?" The question hung in the air between us. He didn't have an answer. He just looked down at his hands, a man trapped between the woman he thought he loved and the mother who actually did. He didn't know it, but that was the last chance he had to stop what was coming. His silence was his consent to the events that were about to unfold. He had chosen his side, and in doing so, he had left me with no other option but to choose mine. I had to save him from himself. The personal connection to this whole ordeal went deeper than just my son. It was about my late husband, Robert. Margaret and Chloe's whole campaign was a desecration of his memory. They talked about his money, they critiqued his house, they planned to tear down the walls he had designed, but they never once spoke his name with respect. To them, he was not a man, a husband, a father. He was a brand, a source of capital. Their grasping ambition was an insult to the life of quiet integrity he had lived. The genetic condition that had so terrified Leo was Robert's greatest sorrow. Watching his own father fade away had been the defining trauma of his young life. He had spent years volunteering with and donating to organizations that supported families dealing with the disease. His decision not to have biological children was not just about fear. It was a deeply moral stance, a final act of love and protection for a family he would never have, a tribute to the father he had lost twice, first to the disease and then to death. For Chloe and Margaret to dismiss this profound, painful decision as a strange hang-up or a phase was the ultimate act of disrespect. It told me everything I needed to know about their character. They had no empathy, no understanding of a grief that didn't serve their own narrative. They saw a man's soul-deep conviction as an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be fixed. I spent a long, sleepless night after Leo left. I sat in Robert's old reading chair, the one Margaret had marked for removal, and I thought about my promise to my son. I had promised to protect his secret, but I had also made a silent vow to my husband on the day he died, a vow to protect our son, to guide him, to make sure he grew into the good man Robert always knew he could be. Those two promises were now in direct conflict. To keep Leo's secret meant to stand by and watch him be devoured by these predators. It meant allowing them to coerce him into a medical procedure he did not want, to trap him in a marriage built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. It meant letting them win. To break his secret, on the other hand, felt like a betrayal of the deepest trust a mother and son could share. It would humiliate him, expose him, and potentially damage our relationship forever. I weighed the two options in the dark, silent house. Betray his trust to save his future, or honor his trust and abandon him to his fate. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, the answer became clear. A broken trust can be mended. A broken life cannot. He would be angry. He would be hurt. But he would be free. My loyalty was not to his secret. It was to him. And the most loving thing I could do for him now was to declare war on his behalf. My strategy shifted. A quiet word would not be enough. They were masters of spin, of denial. They would simply paint me as a bitter, jealous old woman. I needed to do something they could not ignore, something so public and so undeniable that it would shatter their carefully constructed facade for good. I needed a moment of pure, shocking truth. The party was their stage, and I decided to use it for my own performance. The key artifact in this whole affair was not an object I could hold in my hand. It was not a signed confession or a smoking gun. It was the truth itself, a truth so potent and so personal that its revelation would be catastrophic for them. It was the full story of Leo's vasectomy. Not just the fact of it, but the profound, heartbreaking reason behind it. That was the piece of the puzzle they had completely misunderstood. They saw it as a simple logistical problem, a matter of a minor medical reversal. They had no concept of the emotional and ethical weight behind Leo's decision. I realized that simply stating Leo had a vasectomy would not be enough. They would spin it. Margaret would laugh her tinkling laugh and say, "Oh, boys and their silly phases. He did that years ago. He's already on the waiting list to have it reversed. He's so excited to be a father." Chloe would play the part of the supportive, understanding fiancé, nodding along. They would absorb the blow and reframe it as old news, a minor footnote in their grand love story. No, I had to provide the context. I had to explain the why. I had to tell the story of Robert's father. I had to talk about the genetic disease, the years of suffering, the promise Leo had made to himself never to risk passing that on. I had to make it clear that this was not a phase, it was a sacred vow. By revealing the why, I would not just be exposing their lie, I would be exposing their monstrous cruelty. I would be showing every single person in that room that Chloe and Margaret were not just ambitious, they were predatory. They were willing to trample over a man's deepest held convictions and most painful family history to get what they wanted. The full truth was that they had built their entire engagement, their entire future, on a deliberate and malicious misinterpretation of Leo's character. They had taken his greatest virtue, his compassion, and twisted it into a weakness they could exploit. They called his principled stand a hang-up. They planned to use social pressure and public embarrassment to force him to betray his own conscience. They were not just planning a wedding, they were planning a solectomy. They wanted to cut out the part of him that was his father's son, the part that was thoughtful and moral, and leave only the handsome, wealthy shell they could control. And Leo, my poor, lost Leo, was letting them do it. He was so desperate to be loved, so afraid of conflict, that he was willing to be a passenger in his own life. He was allowing them to rewrite his past and dictate his future. The breakthrough for me was realizing that my son was not a willing participant in this deception. He was a victim of it. He was being emotionally blackmailed, and he was too close to the situation to see a way out. My intervention would not be an act of revenge. It would be a rescue mission. My plan solidified. I would not say a word before the party. I would not give them any warning. I would let them proceed with their perfectly orchestrated event. I would let them put me in my corner. I would let them make their speeches about family and love and, most importantly, about future grandchildren. I would let them build their pedestal of lies as high as they could. And then, at the moment of their greatest triumph, when all eyes were on them, I would kick it out from under them. I would use the truth, the whole, unvarnished, painful truth, as a battering ram. I spent the day of the party in a state of strange calm. The chaos of the final preparations swirled around me, but I felt completely detached from it, an observer watching a play for which I already knew the ending. I chose my outfit carefully. A simple, elegant dress in a dark blue. The kind of dress that says, "I am here, but I am not the center of attention." It was my armor. When guests began to arrive, I played my part. I was the gracious mother of the groom-to-be. I smiled, I shook hands, I accepted congratulations. I watched as Margaret and Chloe, radiant in their designer dresses, moved through the crowd, basking in the glow of their success. They were the queens of this court, and they made sure everyone knew it. Margaret found me as I was speaking to an old family friend. She put her arm around my shoulders, a gesture that looked warm but felt like a clamp. "There she is," she announced to my friend. "The woman who made it all possible. Isn't she wonderful? We just adore her." She squeezed my shoulder painfully. "We've put her at a nice, quiet table where she won't be overwhelmed," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "She needs her rest, you know." My friend looked confused, but I just smiled. "Margaret is so thoughtful," I said, my voice perfectly even. "She thinks of everything." Margaret beamed, convinced she had once again demonstrated her superior social grace. She led me to the table. It was exactly as I had overheard them planning. A small, round card table, barely big enough for one person, draped in the same linen as the others, but clearly an afterthought. It was tucked away in an alcove near the swinging door to the kitchen. From my seat, my main view was of waiters bustling in and out. I was effectively hidden from the main party. It was a public shunning, executed with a smile. "There," Margaret said, patting the back of the single chair. "Perfect. You can see everything from here without being in the middle of all the noise. We'll send Leo over to check on you later." She then turned and swept back into the heart of the party, her mission accomplished. I sat down. I smoothed my dress. From my corner, I had a clear view of the main stage they had set up for the speeches. I watched as Leo and Chloe made their grand entrance to a round of applause. Leo looked handsome in his suit, but his eyes were darting around the room, searching for something. He looked like a trapped animal. Chloe was glowing, waving to the crowd, drinking in the adoration. She was in her element. The party progressed just as they had planned. The food was excellent, the music was tasteful, the conversation was loud and cheerful. People came over to my little table in twos and threes, mostly old friends of mine and Robert's. They were all polite, but I could see the question in their eyes. "Why are you sitting over here?" Their expressions were a mixture of pity and confusion. "Oh, it's the best seat in the house," I would say with a bright smile. "I get to people watch without having to shout over the music." I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me look hurt or embarrassed. I was biding my time. Finally, the moment came. The music softened, and Margaret tapped a spoon against her champagne glass. The room fell silent. She climbed onto the small stage, a microphone in her hand, beaming at the crowd. "Welcome, welcome, everyone," she began, her voice resonating through the speakers. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this magical moment, the engagement of my beautiful daughter, Chloe, to the wonderful Leo." She went on for several minutes, praising Chloe's beauty and intelligence, Leo's charm and success. It was a masterful performance. Then she moved on to the main event. "As a mother, all you want is for your child to be happy," she said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "And I have never seen my Chloe happier. But what truly fills my heart with joy is the thought of the future. The thought of the beautiful family they will build together. I look at them, and I see a future filled with laughter, with love, and with the pitter-patter of little feet." The crowd laughed and applauded. Chloe blushed and hid her face against Leo's shoulder. Leo just stood there, his smile frozen on his face. "I cannot wait to be a grandmother," Margaret declared, raising her glass. "To Leo and Chloe, and to the beautiful grandchildren they will give us all." To the grandchildren, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. That was my cue. As the applause died down, I stood up. I calmly pushed my chair back and walked out from my corner. I moved with a purpose I had not felt in years. People turned to look at me, their faces curious. I ignored them. I walked directly to the stage area. Margaret was just stepping down, her face flushed with triumph. She saw me approaching, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Is everything all right?" she hissed, trying to block my path. "Everything is perfect," I said, my voice low and clear. I walked right past her. There was a chair near the stage, one of the ornate ones they had rented for the occasion. It was sturdy. Without a moment's hesitation, I stepped onto it. The sudden movement, the sheer unexpectedness of it, caused a ripple of silence to spread through the room. I was now elevated, visible to everyone. I could see every face. Leo's, pale with shock. Chloe's, her smile faltering into a confused frown. Margaret's, turning a dangerous shade of red. I took a deep breath. I did not have a microphone, but I had a mother's voice, a voice that could cut through any noise when it needed to. "Excuse me," I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. "I'd like to make a toast as well." All eyes were on me. The air was thick with tension. Margaret started towards me. "Get down from there," she whispered furiously. "You are making a scene?" "I am making a point," I said, not taking my eyes off the crowd. I turned my gaze to Leo. "Margaret just toasted to the future grandchildren Leo and Chloe will give her. It's a beautiful sentiment. But it seems there is one small detail that she and Chloe have overlooked in all their planning." I paused. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. "You see," I continued, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. "That will be quite difficult. Because 3 years ago, my son Leo had a vasectomy." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a physical thing, a wave of shock that you could almost see. Chloe's face went completely white. She looked as if I had just thrown a bucket of ice water on her. She turned to Leo, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Leo was frozen, his eyes wide with horror, fixed on me. He looked utterly betrayed. Margaret recovered first. She lunged towards the chair. "She's lying," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "She's a bitter, jealous woman who is trying to ruin her son's happiness. She's mentally unstable." "Am I Margaret?" I asked, my voice dropping, becoming conversational. "Am I unstable? Or am I just the only one in this room willing to tell the truth?" I turned back to the crowd, my audience. "I'm sure you're all wondering why a young man like Leo would make such a permanent decision. It's not a story he shares lightly. But since his future in-laws are so obsessed with his reproductive choices, I think it's time everyone understood." I looked directly at Chloe and Margaret, their faces a mask of fury and panic. Leo's paternal grandfather died from Huntington's disease. It's a terrible, cruel, genetic illness that steals everything from a person. My late husband, Robert, was lucky. He was not a carrier. But the fear of it, the memory of that suffering, never left him. And it never left our son. I could see dawning comprehension on the faces of my friends in the crowd. They remembered Robert's father. They knew the story. Leo made a decision. I said, my voice softening with the love I felt for my son, a love so fierce it was a physical pain in my chest. He made a profoundly moral and compassionate decision. He decided that he would never, ever risk passing on that gene. He would never risk putting a child, a family, through that kind of suffering. His vasectomy was not a phase, it was an act of love. I let that sink in. Then I turned my full attention back to the two women who had caused all this. And yet, I said, my voice now ringing with condemnation, his fiancée and her mother have been spending the last 6 months planning their entire future around a lie. They dismissed his deeply held conviction as a hang-up. They planned to handle him after the wedding, to pressure him, even to publicly shame him into a reversal he never wanted. I knew this because of the emails. I didn't need to say that. The truth of my words was written all over their guilty faces. I looked at Chloe, who was now openly sobbing, not with sadness, but with rage and humiliation. You didn't want a husband, Chloe, I said, my voice filled with a pity that was more insulting than any anger. You wanted a stud farm. You wanted a brand. And you were willing to destroy a good man's soul to get it. Finally, I looked at my son. He was staring at me, his expression unreadable. The shock had been replaced by a deep, hollow look. He looked broken. My heart broke with his. I am sorry, Leo, I said, and my voice cracked for the first time. I am so sorry for breaking your trust. But I would rather you hate me for telling the truth than watch you spend the rest of your life living their lie. I stepped down from the chair. The silence was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The party was over. I had dropped a bomb in the middle of their perfect, manicured world, and the fallout was just beginning. I turned, and without looking at anyone, I walked through the stunned crowd, out of the tent, and back into my quiet, violated house. I had won, but I had no idea what it had cost me. The immediate aftermath was chaos. I could hear shouting from the tent on the lawn as I closed the front door behind me. Raised voices, accusations, the sound of a woman, probably Chloe, weeping hysterically. I walked into my kitchen, the one room that still felt like my own, and sank into a chair. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour was beginning to fade, leaving behind a cold, hollow feeling. The front door slammed open, and footsteps pounded through the hall. Leo burst into the kitchen. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes blazing. "How could you?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "How could you do that to me?" "I did it for you, Leo," I said, my own voice trembling. "For me," he laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. You told my most private, personal secret to a room full of people. You destroyed my life. They were destroying your life." I shot back, standing up to face him. "And you were letting them. Did you hear anything I said out there? Did you not see what they were planning to do to you?" "I saw my mother get up on a chair and ruin my engagement party," he shouted, his face contorted with pain and anger. "You had no right." "I have every right," I said, my voice rising to match his. "I am your mother. It is my right and my duty to protect you, even from yourself. They were going to trap you, Leo. They were going to force you to betray your own conscience, to betray your father's memory. And you were just going to let it happen because you were too scared to stand up to them." We stood there, feet apart, in the middle of my kitchen, two people who loved each other more than anything in the world, now separated by a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. The kitchen door swung open, and Margaret stormed in, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, her perfect hair disheveled. Chloe followed behind her, a ghost in a party dress, her makeup smeared, her eyes empty. "You," Margaret hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You will pay for this. I will ruin you. You are a horrible, evil woman." "Get out my house," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is not over," she snarled. "Oh, I think it is," I said, turning to look at my son.
Lao?
"Are you going to let this woman speak to me this way in my own home?" Leo was silent. He looked from me to Chloe, his face a canvas of confusion and agony. He was torn. That was all the answer I needed. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Then all of you can get out." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "The party is over," I announced to the stunned guests who were lingering in the hall. "Please leave." Slowly, in shocked silence, people began to file out. They wouldn't look at me. They wouldn't look at Leo. The shame in the air was thick enough to choke on. My friends, the ones who had known me for years, gave me small, sad smiles of support as they left. Chloe's and Margaret's friends shot me looks of pure venom. Finally, only the four of us remained. Margaret grabbed Chloe's arm. "We're leaving," she said, her voice like ice. She glared at Leo. "Don't you even think about calling us." She pulled her daughter out the door and they were gone. Now it was just me and Leo, standing in the wreckage of our lives. The silence was heavier than the shouting had been. "I think you should go too, Leo," I said softly, not looking at him. I couldn't bear to see the accusation in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He just turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I was alone. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, and for the first time all night, I let myself cry. I cried for my son, for my husband, for the simple, quiet life that felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. The next few days were a blur of silence and recriminations. The house felt huge and empty. The caterers and rental companies came to clear away the debris of the party, their employees moving with a quiet efficiency, careful not to make eye contact with the crazy woman who had ruined her own son's life. My phone rang constantly, but I didn't answer. I knew it would be a mix of concerned friends and furious acquaintances of Margaret's. I couldn't face any of them. The one call I was waiting for, the one from Leo, never came. He had cut me off completely. My sister, Clara, who had flown in for the party, was my reluctant jailer. She had witnessed the whole thing, her face a mask of horrified fascination. She was the neutral party, the one who saw both sides. "You know, you could have handled that with a bit more subtlety," she said, sipping her coffee at my kitchen table the morning after the party. "Subtlety was not an option," I said, staring out the window. "They don't speak subtlety. They only understand scorched earth." "Well, you certainly accomplished that," she said wryly. "You scorched the entire county. The phone lines are burning up. Half the people think you're a hero, and the other half think you should be committed." "What do you think?" I asked, turning to look at her. She sighed, her expression softening. "I think you did what you thought you had to do to protect your son. It was dramatic, and probably deeply damaging. But I also think you were right. Those women were vultures. I saw it from the moment I met them." Her words were a small comfort. Later that day, my friend Sarah came over. She didn't say anything about the party. She just wrapped me in a hug and let me cry on her shoulder. "He hates me, Sarah," I sobbed. "I've lost my son." "No, you haven't," she said, her voice firm. "You've shocked him. You've scared him. You've forced him to face a truth he wasn't ready to see. He's not angry at you. He's angry at the situation. He's embarrassed. But underneath all of that, he's grateful. He just doesn't know it yet. Give him time." But time was a slow-moving torture. A week went by. Then, two. The silence from Leo was deafening. I started to spiral, to second-guess myself. Had I gone too far? Had I misread the situation? Had I destroyed my relationship with my only child for nothing? I was in the depths of this despair when the phone finally rang. It was him. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, hesitant. "Leo," I breathed, my heart leaping into my throat. Can I come over?" he asked. "We need to talk." He looked different when he walked through the door an hour later. Thinner, older. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where he had sat the night before the party, a lifetime ago. "I owe you an apology," he said, not looking at me. I was stunned. "For what?" "For not listening," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For not seeing what was right in front of my face. For letting them treat you that way." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with tears. "You were right, Mom. About everything. I was so caught up in it all, so afraid of losing her, that I didn't see what she was doing. What they were doing." He told me what had happened after he left my house. Chloe and Margaret had shown their true colors. There had been no tears of heartbreak, only screams of rage. They weren't mourning the loss of a relationship. They were furious about the loss of a financial and social opportunity. They had berated him, called him weak, a failure, a liar. It was Chloe who had said the final, damning thing. "She told me that the vasectomy didn't even matter," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "She said if I had just played along, we could have used a sperm donor and passed the baby off as mine. No one would have had to know. She said it was a victimless lie." I felt a fresh wave of nausea. "Oh, Leo," I said, my heart breaking for him all over again. "That's when I finally saw it," he said, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "It was never about me. It was about what I could give them. The name, the money, the baby. I was just the container for all of it. You didn't ruin my life, Mom. You saved it." He got up and came around the table, and he wrapped his arms around me. I held my son, my real son, for the first time in what felt like years. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding on to each other, two survivors of a war we never should have had to fight. The healing process was slow. Leo had to rebuild his life, his self-esteem. He had to untangle his finances from Chloe's and deal with the social fallout. Margaret, true to her word, tried to make our lives difficult. She spread vicious rumors about me, about Leo. But she had miscalculated. My public declaration had not just exposed her lies, it had also armed our true friends with the truth. The rumors didn't stick. Instead, Margaret and Chloe became social pariahs, figures of ridicule. They had built their world on a foundation of appearances, and when that foundation cracked, the whole edifice crumbled. They eventually moved away, unable to withstand the shame of their public defeat. My relationship with Leo was changed, but not broken. We were more honest with each other, more respectful of each other's boundaries. The trust one had broken was slowly, carefully rebuilt. He understood that my actions, however extreme, had come from a place of fierce, protective love. A few months later, we were having dinner, just the two of us. He seemed more like his old self, relaxed, happy. "You know," he said, a small, wry smile on his face. "I was thinking, you standing on that chair, it was pretty epic." I laughed. "I'm sorry it had to come to that." "I'm not," he said, his expression turning serious. "I'm not sorry at all. You taught me something that night. You taught me that sometimes the quiet, polite way isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stand on a chair and shout. You have to fight for what's right, for the people you love." He raised his glass. "To the Queen Mother," he said. I raised my glass to meet his. "To the King," I replied. They had tried to put me in a corner, to make me small and silent. But they had forgotten something fundamental. A mother's love isn't small. It isn't quiet. And when it is threatened, it has the power to move mountains or, in this case, to bring a whole, glittering, false world crashing down. They finally learned what it feels like to be small. And I learned that my voice, even from a corner, could be the loudest one in the room.